Hello and welcome back to World 360. Foreign and defense ministers from India and the US will hold their annual 2+2 dialogue this week. But what's different this time around? Which is the latest country to exit China's Belt and Road Initiative? Why are three countries skipping the Pacific Islands Forum meet? We answer these and more in today's episode. So, first up, the India US 2+2 dialogue. Now, this is an annual meeting that takes place between foreign and defense ministers from the two countries. On 10th November, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will fly into Delhi to hold talks with their Indian counterparts, Dr. S. Jaishankar and Rajnath Singh. Now, this 2+2 dialogue was first launched in 2018, but this year there seems to be a lot more at stake. There are two ongoing wars on the world stage, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict, and then the Indo-Pacific, which is proving to be a highly contested region where China and the US are competing for influence. So there's certainly going to be a lot on the agenda when these four officials meet later this week on the 10th and 11th of November. In fact, US Assistant Secretary for Central Asian Affairs Donald Lu, who will also be accompanying Blinken and Austin on their trip to India, said the Indo-Pacific will be a key topic of discussion apart from the two other wars that are going on right now. On being asked if China will be a topic of discussion during the ministerial dialogue, Lu said that the US would be interested to know about the discussions between India and China regarding the border standoff. So far, over 20 commander-level talks have been held on the border issue, and back in August, PM Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping had briefly discussed the issue on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in South Africa. Let's not forget that Blinken will visit India after visiting 5 other countries in a bid to contain the fallout of the Israel-Hamas war and preventing it from turning into a regional conflict. Between 2nd to 10th November, Blinken was scheduled to visit Israel, Jordan, Turkey, and he even recently made a surprise visit to Iraq. He's also going to visit Japan, South Korea, and finally, India. When Blinken ends his trip in India, he would have conducted several conversations and garnered important information from these various countries that he's visited that could also inform how the US positions itself on the world stage as these various conflicts evolve. There may be questions on how the Israel-Hamas war could impact areas where the US and India are in close cooperation, like the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or the IMEC. There's also the I2U2 grouping, which includes India, Israel, the UAE, and the US. Now, the India-Canada diplomatic spat over Indian agents allegedly playing a role in the murder of a Sikh extremist is also likely to be a topic of discussion during the 2+2 dialogue. Donald Lu, when asked about the diplomatic row between India and Canada, reiterated the US's stance that the murder investigation must proceed and India should be cooperative. Now, the spat between India and Canada has certainly put the US between a rock and a hard place because, on one hand, it has a traditional ally who is also a neighbor, and on the other, it has a rising Asian power that Washington views as a counterbalance to China. For our second topic, we're looking at the Philippines, which has become the latest country to exit China's Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. If you recall, just a few months ago, Italy backed out of the project. So let's try to understand what led to this decision by the Philippines government. Over the last few years, China and the Philippines have been at loggerheads over various territorial disputes in the South China Sea. This year, the issue came to a head when a Philippines boat and a Chinese Coast Guard vessel collided in the South China Sea. Now, China argued that a Philippines military ship entered disputed waters without permission, while the Philippines accused the Chinese vessel of dangerous blocking maneuvers. The US, meanwhile, reaffirmed its support to Manila, and Biden, in fact, said that American defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. Now, what we're seeing over the BRI is the fallout of these incidents. The BRI, as you know, is a globe-spanning infrastructure project of China's worth approximately $1 trillion US. To have two countries back out of a flagship program like this doesn't bode well. Back in July, Italy pulled out of the BRI, and its defense minister actually expressed regret over his country ever joining the project. On 3rd November this year, Philippines backed out too. And not just that, almost all of China's major investment projects in the Philippines are currently under question due to political and economic issues. What we're seeing is a sharp reversal from the kind of relationship between Beijing and the previous Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte. Now, a common concern from the current government in the Philippines, led by Bongbong Marcos, is that the previous government fell for China's so-called pledge trap diplomacy, in which Beijing offered large investments in return for territorial concessions in the South China Sea, but that these investments were never fully realized. For our last topic, we're looking further east towards the annual Pacific Islands Forum meet in the Cook Islands from 7th to 9th November. But cracks have started to emerge in Pacific Island unity as three leaders skipped the annual bloc meeting just as US-China geopolitical rivalry has been increasing in the region. So, what is the Pacific Island Forum? Well, it was formed in the 1970s and is an 18-member grouping of 16 Pacific nations, including Australia and New Zealand, as well as 2 French territories. But the prime ministers of Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Papua New Guinea have decided to skip this year's meeting. Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu have not offered explanations as to their leaders' absences, while Solomon Islands said its prime minister is tied down with duties as Minister for Pacific Games. Let's not forget that Solomon Islands struck a security pact with China last year, and Vanuatu's largest external creditor is Beijing. Papua New Guinea, however, appears to be leaning towards the US after having formed a defense agreement with Washington back in May this year. Now, back to the Pacific Islands Forum meet. A resolution at last year's Pacific Islands Forum meet, however, called for a united approach as the US and China compete for influence in the region. And there was also a part of this resolution that said mutual consultation would be recommended before entering into security arrangements. But clearly much has changed in this last 1 year. The US-China geopolitical rivalry in this region has become all that more intense, with the US pledging to build more undersea telecommunications cables to compete with China's influence in the region that has been marked by years of infrastructure lending. Thanks so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnakutty for The Print.